As both of you know, I've been critical of the fact that we have two federal agencies responsible for civil antitrust enforcement. And this, of course, is not your choice. This is a choice made by Congress in years past. And so the fact that the law is the way it is has a lot to do with this branch of government and not to do with your respective offices. And I have to say, your two agencies have done a remarkable job in recent points, in recent months, of making the points that I have with regard to my concerns about having two agencies with overlapping civil antitrust enforcement authority. Yes, it's true that for many decades, the FTC and the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice have jointly handled civil antitrust enforcement. But in the past, the agencies have avoided too much mischief because they've generally played well together. And recently, this appears quite regrettably to have changed. From what I hear, from what I can tell, clearance disputes have become more frequent, more pronounced, and more prolonged. It's bad enough that your agencies sometimes determine who will investigate a matter according to possession arrows and coin tosses. But these clearance disputes impose real costs by wasting resources, creating delays, and creating a certain amount of institutional pettiness. Having two federal agencies handling civil antitrust enforcement is also creating confusion, both here and abroad, when the FTC and the DOJ are not on the same page. This is clearly on display in the recent Qualcomm matter, where your agencies are literally opposing each other in federal court. None of this makes for effective or efficient antitrust enforcement. Not one of us would design a system from the outset if we were writing on a blank slate this way. Earlier this summer, we learned that your agencies have begun investigating the large tech firms, some large tech firms, to see if they've violated antitrust laws. And I've said before, I'm encouraged that the FTC and the DOJ are bringing much-needed antitrust scrutiny to these tech companies. But I'm also concerned about the way you've divvied up these investigations. Now, I understand when it comes to specific investigations, your clearance process designates a single agency to investigate a specific matter. But based on news reports, it sounds like your agencies may be pursuing monopolization investigations of the same companies at the same time through two different agencies. Now, let me be clear. I don't think your agencies should be divvying up parts of a monopolization investigation of the same company, tech company or otherwise. Former FTC Chairman Bill Kovacic has called this nuts, and I agree. There's no analytical basis for splitting a monopolization investigation between the FTC and the Department of Justice. Doing so simply looks like both agencies simply want to have not just a slice of the same pie, but the same slice of the same pie at the same time. This will have the agencies stumbling over each other and will inevitably undermine rather than further the enforcement efforts of both agencies. Consumers, of course, deserve better than that. Consumers are harmed when you're tripping over each other and you're unable to do your job effectively. On the topic of big tech, I'd like to hear your views today on whether viewpoint bias should be the subject of antitrust enforcement. I share many of my colleagues' concerns with what appears to be bias against certain political viewpoints, particularly conservative political viewpoints by companies like Google and like Facebook. What I don't necessarily share is the suggestion by some that antitrust is necessarily the proper tool to address this issue. But I'd welcome your thoughts on this topic, as I certainly have more to learn. We often hear talk that antitrust policy needs to evolve to address competitive issues in these tech markets. Advocates of the so-called hipster antitrust theory argue that antitrust is too focused on price effects. They claim that this causes antitrust enforcers to ignore anti-competitive conduct in markets where consumers receive services for free. I'd love to know your thoughts on that topic. Finally, I hope we'll have time to discuss what the Antitrust Division is doing when it comes to music. This includes what the division is considering in its review of the music licensing consent decrees. Also, and I know this is something that my Democratic colleagues have raised with you, I'd like to hear more about what the Department of Justice is doing to police anti-competitive conduct in the ticketing market.